Okay, I think we're just about ready here, being settled. We have a few more that'll be finding their chairs, but let's begin. How am I doing? 2 o'clock sharp.
Right on time.
Okay. So, hello and welcome to everyone. We would like to start today's presentation, so as I said, if you would please settle in and give your attention here, we would appreciate it. I'm Joanne Groth, President and Curator of the Hartland Historical Society, volunteer. I have the right to make mistakes now. I hope you are enjoying today's great weather. It's fantastic after all of the rain we've had, so thank you for that. I would also like to thank our volunteers that are here today to help make this day happen, and to all those that took the time to do the prep beforehand. That's our lawn work, our garden work, our housework, etc., the paperwork, whatever, marketing, advertising. So I can't do it without you. We need all of you. I'd like to give a shout out to Cindy Rhines. Even though she was unable to play for us today, she did provide us with her little jukebox for us to listen to some country music today. And the PA system that's set up. Thank you, Cindy. I know. I try to make it hard for you, Cindy, whenever I can. Later on, to end the program, we'll listen to Sally Dewey will come up and she's going to sing a blueberry song. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. Our program will begin with our guest speaker, Nevin Carling. Nevin graciously accepted an invitation to speak on Azure Benjamin just a couple of months ago, if that. He will be presenting his own composition on Azure and architecture. Now, a little backstory I can't help to tell. Nevin had contacted the Hartland Historical Society a couple times over the last couple of years. First in 2020, when he was working in the Marshfield School of Weaving in Marshfield, Vermont. He was conducting a survey throughout New England in order to gather preliminary information about the location, size, and style of barn frame looms. I didn't have anything to give him, but I'm certain that it had some interesting information. Second, in January 2023, he came looking for information on the house that Azure Benjamin may have grew up in. And also if we had any listing of houses built pre-revolution. I was able to help him there, giving him a bit of information about Azure and the fact that we had 2 of his books. And asked him to come visit us when he could. Now, a year and a half later, we have come full circle. I say this full circle because on the day in August of 1989, when the Gaylord House was dedicated and first opened, a gentleman by the name of Bill Hosley from the Wadsworth Athenaeum spoke about Azure Benjamin. We have a recording of that 1989 event 35 years ago. So I emailed Nevin and say, Nevin, I have this recording, would you be interested in it? Maybe he would derive some other information on Azure or just see how it was done. Nevin replies back, oh, that's funny. Bill Hosley was a mentor of mine in my early school years. So Bill Hosley, on talking to Nevin, may still be working at the Wadsworth Athenaeum as a curator of American decorative arts, and he has authored a few books. From the bio I got from Nevin, he sent me on both his education and interest in activities. Hosley certainly did impress Nevin. I will read just the beginning of Nevin's bio, and I hope you will read the rest as it is very interesting and explains what work he is involved with now. You can find a copy of it up on the second floor. I'll make note, I haven't gotten it there yet. Nevin is a conservation, timber, framer based in Connecticut. He is a graduate of the University of York, England, where he earned a first-class undergraduate degree in archaeology and heritage management. On seeing this, I said, oh, I guess I don't have to worry about whether he'll be able to do a presentation for us or not. He is currently pursuing an MSc in Timber Building Conservation at the Weald and Dunlin Living Museum in Chichester, England. Nevin works extensively with first period and 18th century buildings in the Connecticut River Valley, as well as on an array of both historic buildings and traditionally constructed new builds throughout New England. I don't need to say any more, I think, at this point. Nevin, welcome, and thank you for giving us this time to make this presentation. Nevin.
I'll pick up my trash.
You can hold it if you prefer.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll see how long the iPad lasts for. It might just get cooked in the sun and turn off. So, I decided to go digital, mostly for surveying work. And I do like a lot of barn surveying, building surveying, and it's easier to just do it. No. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, a little higher. There we go. Okay. I decided to go digital like last year because of the survey work that I do. It's just easier to do it right on the iPad than do hand drawings and then transfer them into the computer. That also means that I've gotten rid of paper, for better or for worse. So I have my script on my iPad, but if it sits in the sun too long, it tends to kind of cook itself. So anyways, well, thank you so much for the introduction. I don't know how much that's going to translate on my work thus far into a presentation on Asher Benjamin, but well, we'll give it a try. Anyways, I'm gonna have to. Oh, sure. Yeah, this was an unideal setup, but I've been sort of also on a little bit of a presentation tour at different historical societies, and I've just been doing PowerPoint so much that when Joanne asked me to do this, I just assumed it would be a PowerPoint, and not that it would be outside or without associated technology. So we'll make do. Anyways, all right, next slide. Oh, no, back slide. This presentation will give a brief overview of Asher Benjamin's career, work, and impact on the architecture of the early American Republic. By exploring his work, I hope to show how Asher Benjamin and his many buildings are still relevant today and how they may help us build a brighter future. So Asher Benjamin is thought to have been born June 15th, 1773 in Hartland, Connecticut. For a while, like up until the 1950s, everyone thought he was from Massachusetts until more information came to light, but his early documentary record is rather still quite ephemeral. Although it's sort of unknown precisely where he was born, it's thought or theorized that he was born in Hartland Hollow in a typical rural setting experienced by the majority of Americans in this period, in the late 18th century. And this is what is thought to be Asher's house on the right-hand side, which there is a picture of upstairs if you can't see it. In the 30s when that was taken, it seems to be in bad shape, so I'm kind of doubtful it exists anymore, or it doesn't exist anymore, but how long it lasted, who knows. Well, I was looking at the map, and it looked like it just missed the flood zone. It was just north of it, but I don't know. Anyways, Asher's father died suddenly when Asher was 4, leaving his mother and siblings and himself with just 6 pounds. Elizabeth, Asher's mother, would remarry a man named I think you say it, Alishama Porter, but it's unclear if the Benjamin situation as rural poor changed much after this marriage. Asher Benjamin would apprentice with an unknown master carpenter at the age of 17 and complete his apprenticeship by the age of 21. This system of apprenticeship was typical during this period where the apprentice would essentially be adopted by the master carpenter, thus allowing someone like Asher to gain the practical experience in the trades. Next slide. By 1794, Asher had completed his apprenticeship and landed a very important job working under Thomas Hayden, a renowned local architect in the lower Connecticut River Valley. Asher was tasked with carving the Ionic capitals on the portico to Oliver Phelps's newly constructed addition, which is now the northern addition of the Phelps Hathaway house in Suffield, Connecticut. The design likely came from William Payne's 1774 book, The Practical Builder, which likewise appeared in Thomas Hayden's inventory at the time of his death. It is a real feat of skill to not only lay out such a complex design, but also then carve it with the level of competence that is evidenced by the capitals today. Soon after completing his work at the Phelps House, Asher was commissioned to work on the newly built State House in Hartford, now the old State House, designed by the famed Massachusetts architect Charles Bulfinch. It was here that Asher, at the age of 23, designed and constructed what was probably the first, it's either elliptical or cylindrical, staircase in the nation. In completing these two monumental projects, Asher Benjamin proved himself a consummate carpenter, designer, and architect, and soon set out on his own up to Greenfield, Massachusetts. I'm 23 right now. I wish I could do an elliptical staircase, but I do not nearly have that much skill. I'll show you on the next slide. So,
when did Thomas Hayden die?
I can't remember when Thomas Hayden died, but it's, it's at the turn of the 19th century. This is, on the left, William Payne's The Practical Builder, and there is a portico that he designs, and on the right, you can see the portico that's at the Phelps House, and they're pretty much the same portico. And you can see the Corinthian columns, capitals. No, it's Ionic. Or is it Corinthian? It's Ionic. It's Ionic.
Ionic is where you this one.
Is that? Yes.
That's Ionic.
That is Ionic. That presumably, I mean, I don't know how much restoration work has been done, but presumably those are the capitals that, oh man, just keeps dipping in and out, that Asher Benjamin carved, which are caked in plastic paint, which obscures a lot of the detail, but they are exquisitely done. All right. And then this, you can see in the background on the left is this staircase that he did at 23. And on the right, this is an aside. But you look at that building and you go, that isn't Hartford. That's actually, when it comes back, the Liverpool Town Hall that Charles Bulfinch saw before he came back to America when he was a young man, and then just redid it in Hartford. So an early federal building in America really isn't. It's an earlier Georgian building in England. But, he did a good job copying it, I must say. Asher arrived in Greenfield in 1796 and soon got to work designing and constructing two of the most ambitious and impressive houses in the Connecticut River Valley of that period, or rather the upper Connecticut River Valley in that period. The Coleman Hollister House, which is now Greenfield Public Library. Oh, it's the other way around. That's McCarthy's. It's the funeral home. Yes, Coleman Hollister House, which was built in 1796, was commissioned by William Coleman, who was a local lawyer, who sought, quote, a house worthy of its view, which Asher Benjamin undoubtedly delivered. Unfortunately for Asher, by 1797, Coleman had been scammed out of an estimated $30,000 in a land speculation scheme in Georgia, and had to take out a loan to pay off the house, and then promptly moved to New York. Luckily for Asher, Jonathan Leavitt, a wealthy attorney in Greenfield, commissioned him in 1797 to construct his home and office. As far as I can tell, this project went without hiccups. There's no controversy around it. It was at this time that Asher published his first book, The Country Builder's Assistant, in which an approximation of the Leavitt house can be seen in plate 31. So, it's a little too small, but down here is the Leavitt house with some less detailed. I think Jonathan Leavitt said, I'll have it a little bit more restrained than how I think Benjamin's drawing in the book is quite ambitious. After Fisher's, I almost said Fisher. I gave last week a presentation at the Jonathan Fisher House, and I've just got so many names stuck in my head of all these early 19th century builders. Asher's first publication was a boon to his name and his legacy. Pattern books for both architecture and furniture had been published in England and Europe since the late 17th century. They were imported to the American colonies in the 18th century and were in the library and tool chests of some of the very best architects and builders throughout this period, like Thomas Hayden or Bulfinch, who actually got to go see the buildings in person rather than just get the books. These pattern books were generally only used to construct the highest status buildings throughout New England, whereas middling and lower class houses developed their own unique vernacular architecture. However, the fervor of the newly founded American Republic spurred on both a building boom, but also influenced ideas about how architecture should represent our democratic beliefs, and who should be the ambassadors of these beliefs. Although we have thus far only looked at higher status buildings, because those are the really great ones. Well, no, I'm more of a vernacular architecture person myself, but it's easiest to see the kind of high style that Asher Benjamin is known for in the highest status buildings. Asher's first publication came to influence the building trades at every socioeconomic level. This was a conscious decision on Asher's part, as even the name, The Country Builder's Assistant, implies that the book is not for the urban architect, but rather the craftsmen and the craft system Asher trained in as a youth in Hartland, or around Hartland. After completing his stint in Greenfield, Asher Benjamin continued further up the Connecticut River to the town of Windsor, Vermont. The houses built in Windsor and attributed to Asher Benjamin, because a little bit, there's not quite the paper trail there, but people look at a house and they go, that's probably an Asher Benjamin. Are a little enigmatic, as while they employ many of the architectural features associated with the federal period and Asher's building style in particular, they don't follow the same precedent set previously in Greenfield. To say it simply, these houses were kind of wacky. The Fullerton House, which is the one on the left of this slide, is the one of the more prevalent examples of this, where it appears like kind of every federal trope was thrown at the facade of this building. Maybe it was Asher's pattern book coming to haunt him, as now his clients had an even easier access to designs and patterns than before, as only the carpenters would generally have these pattern books, or again, very, very educated, high-class people. And they were simply trying to cram everything they liked from his pattern books onto the facade. Another possibility, and I think this is a little bit more realistic, is that the timber framing in the buildings had not quite evolved to match the architectural styles being applied to them. This could be especially heightened by the frontier setting of Windsor. Windsor is a big boom town at the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century, and is attracting a lot of people from a lot of different areas, and a lot of different builders who are coming with their own traditions. And suddenly Asher Benjamin, who's just published his book, has said, well, we're going to build it a new way. And obviously a lot of, as any Yankee town knows, traditions die hard, right? And so they're going to build the frame exactly how they want to build the frame, and Asher can put whatever he wants on it later. Whatever the case may be, Asher Benjamin was aware of these idiosyncrasies and expressed in many of the commissions that he had built in Windsor, and sought to create an architectural school there to train joiners, carpenters, and housewrights alike, although it's unclear if the school really ever came into fruition. I wish, yeah, it's unfortunate we can't see it, but really, there is a picture of the Fullerton House, which is now in New Canaan, Connecticut. It got moved down in the 20th century. They're a little bit easier to visit. It is really quite a wild facade. It has everything going on. It's got its Palladian windows. It's got this great triangular pediment over the door, big elliptical modillions underneath all the windows, and it's kind of just like, we'll just put that there and we'll put that there. The Conant Hubbard house on the right is a little bit more restrained and is kind of more typical of what you're seeing, that transition from the earlier Georgian vernacular building traditions into American federal traditions. But it still has a lot of fantastic detail. And I will say one more thing. If you read articles about these houses, especially the ones in Windsor, every architectural historian is kind of disparaging about them. It's like, oh, he's not doing this in the right, order. Like, it's kind of fun that they're really weird. That gives them a lot more interest than if they were bog standard, houses that were following everything to a T. And it showed that Asher Benjamin, again, as the consummate builder, could play around with these ideas when circumstances were less than ideal, let's say, between him and his crew of carpenters. So, further publications. We'll go one more. Asher Benjamin would go on to publish 7 books in his life, all of which saw a lot of additions. His most famous book is his first book, which allowed the federal style of architecture to flourish at all levels of the socioeconomic scale. However, Asher did write several books on the Greek Revival style of architecture, which began to emerge in the 1820s and 30s. And his Greek Revival book is the book I'm most familiar with, ironically enough. And in the opening paragraph, I believe, and this is not a direct quote, but from what I remember reading it, he's sort of like, I know that I did the federal style, but that's old news, I'm going to eschew myself of everything that I wrote previously because the Greek Revival style is it, I can't believe I was so naive. It's quite a funny critique of himself. There we go, went one too far. So, a number of examples we can look at. I'm going to start with domestic houses. Asher Benjamin pioneered the design and construction of domestic houses in America, both in the federal style and then again later in the Greek Revival style. These houses range from simple and austere to quite elaborate and garish. Some of the houses include the Colonel John Black House in Ellsworth, Maine, which I've been to now a number of times. Great house. Oh my gosh. It's the Woodlawn Museum in Ellsworth, Maine. So if you're vacationing up near Acadia, well worth a visit, especially if you're stuck in traffic in Ellsworth, like everyone always is. The Black House, or now what is the Woodlawn, is really a monumental home of high style. Kind of in contrast, the Ransom Styles House is much more restrained as far as the federal building goes. So we got on the left, that's the Black House. That's the black screen. Yes, that's the John Black House. On the right is the Ransom Styles House. Goodness gracious. I think I may have fixed it. On the right is, on the upper right is the Ransom Styles House in Argyle, New York, which is just over the Vermont line. And it is much more simple. It is not, as far as a brick house goes, comparing these two houses, it's quite amazing the range in which Asher could work in. But again, that's based off of that client builder relationship. Exactly. How much money do you want to spend? Very much still the case today. Let's see. I've just lost my place. The Styles House is much more akin to actually what you would see maybe in an urban setting, like in New York City or Boston, even though it is just by itself on a kind of city, town block like this. So it's interesting to compare, very much the Colonel Black House is the country estate. The Styles House then is sort of an interesting shift where Ransom Styles seems to have wanted that urban house even though he's in quite a rural setting. Let's see. Likewise, the Asa Waters Mansion in Millbury, Massachusetts is a real eclectic mix of federal and Greek Revival styles that stands out in the landscape. Asa Waters is lower left, which there is actually a very good picture of it upstairs, which is probably easier to look at than this. But for his urban clientele, Asher could design a house like the headquarters house in Boston, which has an elegant simplicity to its facade, which is its lower right-hand side. Not nearly as kind of crazy as Asa Waters, which again is that idea of you have two houses on the left are country mansions, state heads that are, look at me. Whereas even though the Styles House is not in an urban setting, it very much blends into that idea of, simple but elegant. You walk down the city street and you're enthralled by just how not uniform, I can't think of another word, but elegant the whole streetscape looks. It's very much on purpose. It's designed to be that way. There's a word that they use in the 19th century and the 18th century that I just can't remember right now. But it will come to me. Like balanced. Everything is balanced, in its own way. It's pleasing to look at. Next, though, we have houses of worship. Houses of worship are some of the most impressive buildings in the New England landscape and are often where early architects cut their teeth in designing and executing these grand buildings. On the grand scale, New Haven Center Church, completed with the Old Town, is one of the finest examples of federal church building in the country. But in contrast, the African Meeting House in Boston, left-hand side is Center Church, even though everyone should already know what it looks like. You gotta go see that. On the right side is the African Meeting House in Boston, and although not constructed by Asher himself, it's a fantastic example of how his work let everyone engage with the new national building style, allowing congregations and citizens alike to connect themselves with the ideas of equality, equality, and democracy in this period. There's really good, for the African Meeting House, there is very good evidence for, I can't remember who built it now, but their relationship with Asher Benjamin's books, essentially. Lastly, Asher's Unitarian Church in Nashua, New Hampshire, can be seen as an early foray into the Greek Revival style that would spread across America by the mid-19th century. Down on the lower left, it's just a Greek temple. Very similar to this, this is a Greek Revival house behind us. It's a new idea of how to link American architecture by the first quarter of the 19th century with the historic democracies across the nation. So how do we embody Greek democracy? Well, we build Greek houses, or Greek-looking houses, which is always quite jarring when you're driving through the landscape and you're like, oh man, that's like the Temple of Delphi on that hill. What's that doing there? Lastly, Asher Benjamin is responsible for constructing a number of municipal buildings across New England. Municipal buildings are architecturally very interesting, as unlike domestic houses, whose appearance is dictated by personal wealth, and houses of worship, whose style is in part a reflection of their profusion of faith, municipal buildings are built for the public benefit. The Exchange Coffee House was the largest building in Boston until it burned down in 1818. Did not have a long run. It served as a coffee house and a place for business for Bostonians, and that is the building on the top, which is that is serious. Talk about civic pride, right? Likewise. The Bullfinch Hall, which is the lower picture, in Andover, Massachusetts, was designed to replace the earlier Andover Academy building that had burned down. Although Andover Academy is a private institution, the building is a testament to the relationship between architecture and education, especially in the federal period. And this also goes with the big building boom of regional schools across rural towns. It's right after the American Revolution. There's this big push to suddenly educate everyone, because that's how you have informed members of democracies, through education. So everyone could participate. Well, not everyone necessarily, but it's the beginning of that idea that we're now really seeing come into fruition in this modern period. That everyone has a right to participate in a democracy. It should. I labeled this in my notes as Benjamin for the Future, which I kind of like more as the title than Asher Benjamin's Legacy and the Future. Lessons from Asher Benjamin. Asher Benjamin's work is important for us today, as it exemplifies a number of traits we've lost in our current architecture. And while I don't advocate for the outright replication of historic architecture in our modern times, though it's pretty awesome, I do think that there are lessons that we can learn. Although Asher grew up in a rural and quite a poor setting, his ability to apprentice with local craftspeople allowed him to gain the skills required to excel in his craft. However, it's not just through training, the training that Asher likely acquired. Let me read it again. However, it was not just through training that Asher likely acquired his aptitude for architecture, as he had visual examples of different architectural styles around him in the landscape, something which we lack as more and more American homes are built as completely homogenized units. We can drive through the same subdivision and look at the house, a million different times, and that architectural intrigue that gives our New England towns their sense of place is being lost very quickly. As Asher progressed in his career, he relied more and more on skilled local craftspeople to execute his designs. And while there are still plenty of skilled local craftspeople today, we certainly do not have enough to meet the current building demand. Similar to local craftspeople, Asher relied heavily on local materials to construct his buildings, which is something we rarely do now. Oh gosh, I lost my place again. It's better to go with paper, honestly. I am a Luddite. Instead, now we opt to ship materials from all over the world, much to the detriment of local businesses and our local industries. Lastly, Asher knew that education was paramount for building a brighter future. And in our modern age, we desperately need to educate people on the traditions and trades and the construction methods, as these are now the key for constructing a better and more sustainable future. So, to that point, this is the idea of reestablishing a vernacular or a regional architecture to our buildings. In the future, this may look like the reestablishment of local craftsmanship who run small workshops. The benefit of small workshops is that they allow for the reestablishment of vernacular or regional building traditions. Again, that intrigue, that interest. We build homes in our local areas because they suit our local needs. Historically, apprentices learned a certain practice of carpentry, and this is what we were talking about up in Windsor. Sometimes this conflicted. In the shops in which they worked, and when they left, they carried those shops' particular practices with them wherever they went. This means that the workshops were outfits of carpenters who were able to develop unique styles or characteristics in the work, which give us the variability in our building landscape and our homes that we appreciate now. The sameness of the American house, both inside and out, is becoming a serious issue as people now look to reestablish unique characteristics in their communities. And what better way to do that than by looking at the buildings we do appreciate? That's why we gather here in front of this amazing house. I'll go into a brief anecdote. So the picture on the right is from a recent project done in cooperation with it's not Preservation Trades Network, it's Preservation New Hampshire, where we held a class of scribing a sort of traditional vernacular New Hampshire style building to learn to relearn the technique of scribing buildings, as well as showcase it at this event in which we raffled it off. So now someone, funnily enough, in Vermont has a New Hampshire style building. So someone in 100 years will look at that and go, what's the story behind that? And again, this is that same idea. As you're out in somewhere rural, upstate New York, and you drive by and you're like, that's plate 19 from Asher Benjamin's book. You're seeing those ideas being carried across throughout the landscape. And so I think that, it's very, very important for creating an architectural tradition. Secondly, we can go back to the ideas of small-scale production. The beauty of these historic methods and workshops is that they were able to produce high-quality pieces of work that directly serve their community. This idea of local production, that means generally materials would not travel far from their sources, cutting down on wasteful transport costs. Asher could not build his buildings without, only moving the materials from a few miles away rather than shipping them across the country. The quality of goods can be much higher in that case as well. Relationships through work can be built throughout a community likewise. Relationships like those between the logger, the soiler, the furniture builder, the client, the housewright are all interrelated and not separate from one another. And again, this is I keep saying it's all expressed in the built environment. These relationships, these houses, are a series of interactions between different people, and they all come together to make something very beautiful. And then, as another anecdote, you'll see there's me hewing this last winter for a friend. He's got a beautiful 1770s or 80s cape in Vermont. Needs a new sill, as a lot of old houses do. And from me and another friend, we walked up the hill, we cut down a tree, we dragged it down the hill, we hewed it, and had lunch, and we're done in 3 hours. That's pretty fast, and it was actually pretty cheap for him to do it that way. Didn't maybe to our detriment, but it's that idea of and at the end of the day, it was a great time. We got to help a friend, and we got to keep moving on with our day. I think that morning we started off. We made axe handles, hewed this out, went back, and then I can't remember what we did. Started cutting another frame or something like that. So it was a spruce, which is what they got up there. Oh, it was great. It was great to hew. Oh my gosh, what a beautiful tree. So, in conclusion, Asher Benjamin is a very interesting case study of an American character. In some regards, he was self-made. And ultimately, he was able to garner his success because of the age-old traditions that dictated how work was completed in his lifetime. As we approach the 250th anniversary of the founding of our nation, there is an opportunity to reflect on the period and the people who literally constructed our nation. And as we look forward to celebrating our 300th anniversary, I can only hope that in the next 50 years, we can look back and reflect on the lessons of our past in order to build a better future. And I think that's it. No more technology.
Thank you, Nevin. I'm going to have you just stay close by. I may ask if you have a question after I say a few other things. But first, I want to express from the research that I have done recently to tell you that the belief at this point is that Asher Benjamin, his grandfather Samuel, had property in Granville, Massachusetts. Samuel bought property in Hartland, right over the border. So everybody know where Hubbard River is. A lot of people go hiking up that way. Granville, Mass, Hubbard River's running through it. He buys property down in Hartland. His son, I believe they were there. The picture that you see, I believe, is that house that was probably on the Hubbard River where Asher was at least part of his childhood. Because of course back in the day, your children usually are with you for quite some time until they're ready to build their own homes and go on their own way. And as he said, Asher's dad passed away at the age of 25 and his mother remarried to Alzheimer Porter. So Alzheimer lived in the Hollow. He lived down in the South Hollow, which is underwater right now. So that's with looking at land deeds, etc. So it's pretty positive that Asher was in Hartland possibly his first 23 years of life before he went to Greenfield, Mass. To start his career.
Oh, I can get
That, oh, yes. Here we go.
your notes.
No, that's all right. Yeah, don't mess the notes up. So, on that note, I'm going to read a little information. I'm going to leaving him here because I want him to maybe tell us about our Gaylord house, and I'm going to express that through this expert. But I'm going to talk to you about Eliza Gilman right now. So Eliza Gilman was an architect that lived here in Hartland also, but in a different generation. And the influence that Asher Benjamin had for him. But first, being who I am, I need to give you some family history. A little timeline. 1776, right? Revolutionary War is coming upon us. Ephraim and Hannah Gilman came from East Hartford, and they bought 46 acres of land just south of this house. So just imagine, it's still early, so a lot of trees are still up here. It's still a very small community. He built his home and he raised his family there. He was a Revolutionary War soldier as a private. And the town's records show him that he was an innkeeper. Ephraim and Hannah passed 1811 and 1812. In 1815 and 1843, their son, George Clark Gilman, owned that homestead. And he raised 6 children, 3 girls, 3 boys, with his Hartland native wife, Sarah Blakesley. That's a very close name to us too as an early settler. George died there in 1843 at the age of 60. And that homestead was then torn down about 1850. So the family obviously must have moved in with other family members, etc. 1815, George and Sarah's 3rd child was Elijah E. He was born here, and he became a wagon maker, and he was the noted architect we talk about today. In 1838, Eliza lived on Center Street, just south of the Second Congregational Church, But the church wasn't there at that point. The church didn't come until 1768. He was living in the house of Ensign, who was one of our first settlers. So the house was a 1760s house that he lived in. In 1845, Eliza, at the age of 30 years old, sold this piece of property, the 1760s house, and his wagon making business to his brother, who was Deacon Samuel. The records show at this time in 1845, Eliza bought land from his brother Chester. He designed the house that we know as the Gaylord House Museum today. His brother Chester had property and lived down the road. He actually comes around, goes around, right? The Hamlins that we know about that lived here, one of the last ones living here, it actually was a Gilman house. Chester Gilman built that house, sold property then to his brother Elijah to build this house. But note about the 1760s house, which is a shame, actually that house stood until 1965 when a bad fire occurred and it burned to the ground. 113 years it provided shelter. Wow. 1850, the house next door to Samuel, the 1760 house, which was built by Joel Ensign, the son of the original 1760s house, also became a Gilman home. So obviously some of the family members took that house, and that house still stands today. That is just down the road here. If you go to the left and look, and it has a front porch with columns on it. Not a Asher Benjamin house, but it does have a front porch with columns. The Gilmans live there. The ownership of these homes that I've just mentioned lasted until the 1880s. Eliza obviously had big plans for himself. So in 1854, was it 9 years later, he moved to Winsted. He was 39. He founded the Gilman Carriage Company. He designed and built his company's buildings and 2 others. And he possibly his own home on Main Street, but there's nothing there to prove that out. His 3 buildings under the company name Hallett and Gilman still stand today. So when you go to Winsted, think about Park Hardware, that building, 11 and 13 North Main, Gilman. 60 and 68, where they have the gift shop and clothing store now right at the corner. That's a Gilman building. And then next door to that, the brick one, which you can tell by its more, I don't know what to call it, Gothic or whatever style it is. That is a Gilman building too, stands today to represent his life. Eliza was a Hartland postmaster. In Winsted, he was a banker, a real estate broker, a state representative, and a probate judge. And he left this world when he was 71 years old. In summary, the Gilmans owned 5 homes and properties, 1776 to 1880s. So they were here in Hartland for over 100 plus years. And what we have today is 1 home that still stands and the one that was built by Ensign that was during the Gilmans' empire, we'll call it. So they, of course, were a very big part of Hartland in our early years. Now, about the Gaylord House. The following excerpt is from A Portrait of Eliza Gilman, 1816, 1887, and the Greek Revival Style in Hartland by Karen McNulty. I know some of you know her name too. She was a librarian at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in 1988. Her words: "It is no coincidence that in the year noted architect Asher Benjamin's death, 1845, architect and wagon maker Eliza E. Gilman designed and built a Greek Revival home in Hartland, which we now know today as the Gaylord House. It is certain that Gilman highly regarded Asher Benjamin's accomplishments in the field of architecture, both natives of Hartland, of Connecticut, and of New England. The Gaylord House is a magnificent tribute to Benjamin's zeal for the Greek Revival style and a prominent testimony to American domestic architecture during the intervals of 1830 to 1850, when Greek Revival became the national style." If it's true or not. The Gaylord supports all identifying features, and I will say them out loud, see if we understand them. Gabled roof of low pitch. The fact that it is side gabled rather than front gabled is attributed directly to Benjamin's influence. Cornice lines emphasized with wide band of trim divided in two parts in which forms a triangle pediment on the gabled ends. Another azure. The absence of an entry porch, which apparently was a New England variant at the time. Abbreviated door enframement and typical 6-pane glazed window treatments. In contrast, now, does everybody kind of understand what I just said for the most part? Yeah, if you look at your door now, it's very simple design, but it was an Azure Benjamin influence. And as you see, the style of the gable. In contrast to Benjamin, Gilman found the elaborative and decorative details of the style, as Nevin was pointing out, such as columns, capitals, and full height or full facade entry porches. Yeah, wow, to be inappropriate to the character of our community. He scaled down the embellishments, envisioning a home current to popular standards, yet complementary to the simplicity of local architecture and the rustic mode of living. Because the principal industry in Hartland in 1845 was agriculture, right? And because Gilman's wagon making trade, functionality preceded adornment. So that's my story on our house. Does anybody have any questions as far as what was spoken about architecturally? I'm going to say it again, I believe, but second floor, many of the buildings that he has spoken about here today, you will see their picture on the wall up on the second floor with their names there and the story behind it if you have the time, or come back. And also a little genealogy on Benjamin's home, etc. So, no questions are Monica?
Yep. I was very interested when you were talking about Osher Benjamin's foray into regional schools. You had said as a part of his municipal buildings. And I was a consulting teacher, which means I have been in many, many, many schools all over Connecticut. By far, the most beautiful school I've ever been in is the Housatonic Valley Regional High School. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, up in Great Barrington.
No, it's in Falls Village.
Falls Village.
Canaan.
Canaan. Oh, okay, yes. No, I know. Now I know which one. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was wondering because according to guidelines for modern schools, are no longer appropriate about teaching in a school like that. Very, very huge, gigantic hallways.
Right.
It means a lot of acoustic treatments. But every day when I walked into the school, it just gave me great joy. So I'm just wondering, what do they do about that? Are there many schools like that left, or have they been abandoned and relinquished to building more modern schools?
Let's see if I can answer that. As far as I know, I think Bullfinch Hall is the only school building that Asher Benjamin designed himself. But certainly, these books are being propagated throughout the country. And the 1790s to early 1800s is when you get that school building campaign that then, you get all of the little one-room schoolhouses, and then by the end of the 19th century, they're consolidated into regional high schools, early 20th century. I think right now, school buildings are sort of the biggest, or one of the bigger question marks we have, especially in adaptive reuse. With the advent of busing, busing kids, especially in rural areas, to a single place rather than having smaller schools either in town or something like that, those buildings have been sort of rendered obsolete in a certain way. I mean, even in I think there's two abandoned late 19th, early 20th century schools in Portland, Maine. It's just they've opted to go for a modern building that can accommodate one large class rather than having multiple small classes. I think there is a push to save the buildings because they really are architecturally significant. Especially school buildings of that period are being designed by large architectural firms in Boston and New York, and they were a point of civil pride, again, for a lot of these communities. They had a great-looking school that functioned really well. and being able to maintain those buildings in a new way is going to become really important. I mean, I was thinking of maybe it's Onion Mountain School, the one that's in Great Barrington that's been abandoned for a long time. That is, or is it Housatonic River Valley? It's sort of behind where the co-op is, if you know downtown Great Barrington. But they're now redeveloping it for some kind of housing. It seems like most of these schools get turned into housing, but I think sort of it's the easiest thing, right? You have a bunch of boxy rooms, you know, oh, we'll turn them into apartments. But I think also a little bit more ingenuity when looking at these buildings could also be applicable. There's one school, I think it also is in Portland, it's become a community center because it had one of the most fantastic gymnasiums sort of around here, and so they kept that alive. You know, they had like a second floor circuit for track and field and everything, and so they said, okay, you know,
Well,
why get rid of that? You know, we'll just...
Rockland, and there's a school that was turned into art studios.
Was art studios as well. I'm not sure in Rockland. I don't know which school you're talking about, but there's a lot of cases like that over the country. But it's again, it's like asking communities, okay, what do we want to do with these buildings? How are they going to best serve us? And sometimes there isn't an answer. Or you can do the crazy thing like we did in Hartford, which is bulldoze the Hartford High School, right? Because like, oh, we're going to put a highway here, you know, and that isn't the right direction, you know. But you can take multiple different stances on it, right? I mean, everyone says the greenest building is the one that's already standing. So why build new housing if you can put it into a school and figure out how to integrate the whole system? But I think in the next 10 years we'll have a lot more answers when people have gotten to grips a bit more with these buildings and figured out what really works. So I'm sorry if that's not the most satisfactory answer.
I just always wondered about it because I kind of am figuring its day is going to come. It's the only one I can think of that is still, you know, in that mode of, I'm sure it was built in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
So,
It's sad, but there's still hope, you know. I mean, especially their own masonry buildings, which really are, you know, way easier to work on, honestly, than wooden buildings for the most part. It's just, again, it's doing due diligence for the most part, you know, and all the town or whoever owns that building has to do is keep a good roof on it, and it's pretty much good for, you know, you can mothball it for a long time as long as the roof is sound. So if there isn't a good solution for it, just maintaining it until someone comes up with a great idea or there's the investment capital to put into that building is pretty much the best solution.
Did someone else raise their hand? I thought I saw somebody else. Yes.
During Asher's time frame, what were the requirements to become an architect? I mean, he came from, you know, meager,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, and there weren't many schools, Yale and Harvard.
Yeah.
So how did he become an architect?
Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, go ahead.
Unless you want to.
Well, I'm gonna. I'm
we're
just gonna
voting.
make first just a comment on that as far as whatever has been written at this point is that he was somewhat self-taught. So we're gonna remember he's Hartland. He's living in the woods. His father, they had a mill on the Hubbard River, so he probably was learning about wood, working with wood, sawing wood during his early years on that mill time. And it is unfortunate we don't maybe know exactly who that person was, whether you say it's Hayden or whatever, that it turned him on to doing more woodworking and being a better craft at it. But that was what made Asher so special, is that he was up against those architects that were Yale graduates, were educated. He was never educated in a formal school of that nature.
So he really wasn't an architect, he was a self-proclaimed architect.
That's a good question. He never went to school.
I mean, the label architect really becomes sort of a title people use in the early 19th century, and it isn't codified as it is an actual, you know, as a skill or a training until by the mid 19th century. I think the earliest architects who are coming out of architectural schools are I can't remember his name. He built the spa in Brattleboro in the 1840s and 50s, and he was one of the earliest, you know, what we would call a professional architect who's gone through school, but he wasn't a builder, you know, and that was the sort of, I think, Asher Benjamin's way into it. He had natural talent, and he was good at drawing. He published himself. Well, he got someone to publish his books, which is a great boon. How do you make yourself an architect? You tell everyone you're an architect, but you also build really outstanding buildings, right? I mean, at the age of 21, to go from carving capitals to building the first staircase of its kind in the country, I mean, even that's impressive for that period. That's exceptional. And so I think his exceptionalism was recognized very early on, and that's how he just, Stebbins' house as well. He just kept, and he had great connections. I mean, that was how you were also an architect. It was very much for Hayden and Bulfinch. It was a gentleman's trade. It was something that the wealthy did. What's his name? Who built St. Paul's Cathedral in London? Christopher Wren.
Oh, Wren.
He's just good at drawing. St. Paul's Cathedral was his first building. You were either good or you weren't. I guess, right? I mean, that's a very simple way to put it. But it was through connection, and Gordon got his job doing St. Paul's through his connections being in the upper echelon of society. It submitted it into a competition that they had for gentlemen to submit drawings for St. Paul's, and someone was like, "All right, you got it, build it," And we wouldn't do that nowadays, but I think Asher Benjamin's work spoke for itself for a lot of people, and that's why they hired him, and that's why he got the title architect, even though it was self-ascribed. But we call him an architect now. We would certainly not call him anything else, So you had your question first.
Different pronunciations of Asher. No, it's Asher.
It's
Ash.
He's saying Azure with
Azure.
the
With a U-R. Yeah.
But that's not what it is.
Yeah.
It is Asher.
Asher.
Ash.
Or if you're from Maine, Asher.
Asher.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to elongate it at the end of it. Yeah. Yeah. But,
Oh.
go ahead,
Oh,
the
yeah.
gentleman.
What money would he have received for doing a basic house?
Gosh. I don't know. Well, I mean, not Leave It. The other one in Greenfield, Massachusetts was $30,000 then. I don't know what it is now. It's a lot of money. That was a lot of money for for just coming out of the American Revolution even then, which is why he defaulted on it. He didn't have that money. I don't know. It depends. You'd have to look at ledger books. I don't have that off the top of my head, unfortunately. It also wasn't strictly monetary. There is, I have the account books of we wouldn't call him an architect, but he was a housewright in the late 18th century from East Windsor, Connecticut. Now I'm blanking on his name. And he was working for cider, for someone to thresh his wheat for him. It wasn't necessarily completely a monetary exchange. It was debit and credit, and to that effect, you didn't necessarily have to pay it at the end of your bill. You could pay it in pieces over 10, 20 years. They had the sort of debit and credit system and ledgers of this period in the 18th and early 19th century is a really complex relationship that people had with one another, of just, sometimes debit and credits could go on for a lifetime between different people. So it's really hard to quantify it now when we just exchange things monetarily. But a lot of it was some money, some labor, some food, some other things, some favors. I'm sure Asher Benjamin got a lot of referrals from other people that paid itself forward as well. The next house that he after Coleman was Leave It, and I'm sure they were both lawyers in Greenfield. You could, you're walking down Main Street in Greenfield, you see the house that's going up as well, and you say, oh man, I want that. But there's also word of mouth in town, right? And all up and down the Connecticut River Valley, people are talking about this person because his work is so prominent in the landscape. And so it's a little bit of payment was in building something that someone else will hire you right after that for as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Are we good? Anybody else have any other questions? I know I did come across on reading, but I'm not remembering the whole detail, about getting $4 for this or $12 to do one cornice or something of that nature. It's upstairs on one of the articles. So it's certainly minimal in our time frame. So, okay. We'll continue. So now that we've heard about Azure and architecture, I ask you again to enjoy going to the second floor where you'll see a timeline of Azure. So if you really look at that wall, you'll see the birth, the houses that he was doing, the churches he was doing, when he was married, etc. And definitely try to enjoy those pictures. I think you might appreciate how one gentleman helped influence the architect of our landscape. There's also two of his books are there. One is an 1830s book that shows you the type of pattern work that he did. And again, I say if you don't have the time to read about it today, come back. We're open the first Sunday, 2 o'clock in September and October, or next spring. It will be up until our next picnic next year. I'm going to end the program with a blueberry song from Sally Dewey. Now, I want to say this song was written by David Ransom, her uncle, in 2015. David, who passed in 2022, is a son of Stanley Ransom, one of the founders of the Hartland Historical Society. David gave his time and skill to Historical Society for many years. I want to recite, Sally can come up. I don't see her. Where? She can come up while I'm going to recite the lyrics to you first, just to kind of give you familiar to what the song is about. It's called Blueberry Pie, though, just to, give you a start. Sally, you're going to come over here in the end also. Come on up with me. She has this for you to turn on for your guitar, okay? And I'm going to just take a minute here, and then I wanted to say, when she has finished her song, it is blueberry time. Desserts await you. Certainly help yourself again. There's coffee, lemonade, and iced tea there. Or if you want another hamburger, hot dog, the grill is open if you didn't get a chance when you first came in. Can't thank you enough for coming and supporting Historical Society as you do, both in your time and monetarily. Much appreciated. So, David Ransom wrote this after our 25th Blueberry Picnic, celebrated in 2015 with the hopes of his granddaughter Nicole Smith, his sister Grace Jones, and Sally Dewey would sing it. I do believe we did get it to it one time. Grace is no longer with us. So today, Sally will read, and again, the blueberry pie. These town folks long ago baked nice blueberry pies. These tarts, jams, and jellies would all win a prize. The same is true today as we gather around, praising their efforts on Gaylord House grounds. The chorus, blueberry, blueberry, blueberry pie, chomp a piece down with whipped cream piled on pie. Chomp a piece down with whipped cream, my oh my. Those first Hartland settlers we honor today, they cleared this rough land for the wood and grain hay. But one of their favorite, when dinner was nigh, was an extra large helping of blueberry pie. Chorus, when we were young and worked on the farm, to Aunt Florence's blueberry bushes we'd swarm. We would pick loads of berries and then we would cry, Mother, please bake us a blueberry pie. And now we will hear it in a musical note. And we do want to make a comment. Florence is being spoken about here. Florence lived in the house down the road, the brown house on the right, and everyone did come. The low-growing blueberry bushes were there in their pastures, and it was definitely an event. Do you want me to get rid of this? Okay.
I hope it doesn't blow away.
That's good.
Those town folks long ago baked nice blueberry pies. Their tarts, jams, and jellies would all win a prize. The same is true today as we gather around, praising their efforts on Gaylord House ground. Blueberry, blueberry, blueberry pie, jump up, up, down with cream piled high. Jump a piece down, whipped cream, my oh my. Those first Hartland settlers we honor today. Those first Hartland settlers we honor today. They cleared this rough land for the wood grain and hay. But one of their favorites, when dinner was nigh, was an extra large helping of blueberry pie. Blueberry, blueberry, blueberry pie. Chomp a piece down with whipped cream piled high. Chomp a piece down with whipped cream, my oh my. When we were young and worked on the farm, to Aunt Florence's blueberry bushes we'd swarm. We'd pick loads of berries and then we would cry, Mother, please make us a blueberry pie. Blueberry, blueberry, blueberry pie. Chomp a piece down with whipped cream piled high. Chomp a piece down with whipped cream, my oh my.
All right, all good. Enjoy. The house is open till 4, and the grounds are here for you to enjoy as long as you need to. See you next year.